It is a surprising fact that I, a Welshman, am the president of the International Untouchable Association, and as such, I attended the unveiling of a memorial to our great hero, Dr. Ambedkar, who died in 1956. The ceremony took place in Gujarat, in northwestern India. 10,000 untouchables and Indian tribals attended. There were 4 speakers, 2 of India's leading untouchables, the Vice President of India, and myself.
I had the idea that I would bring here to India the Welsh flag. I want to make it perfectly clear to you all that I am a Welshman, I am not an Englishman.
Some 7 years ago, I was going to make a film on the life of our untouchable hero, Dr. Ambedkar, but when the Indian government digested my plans, they made me a prohibited person to prevent me from communicating the truth about untouchability. Now, I and my 3 colleagues plan to film this Ambedkar celebration legally, and then to push on and film the forbidden Ambedkar life story illegally.
And I am absolutely sure that all Celts would wish me to lay their flags on that shrine on this occasion. And towards the end of Babasaheb Ambedkar's work, the final elimination of untouchability in India.
The man to be known as Dr. Ambedkar was born an untouchable at Mau in Central Province in India during the year 1891. However, in spite of his preordained tragedy of untouchability, he was blessed with one significant stroke of good fortune. His father, a sergeant major in the British Indian Army, was an enlightened good man. And the one possible escape route from the total curse of untouchability had been created by a dictate of the old British East India Company, which stipulated that all of its soldiers and their relatives, male and female, and this included the untouchables, had to be compulsorily educated. In the year 1950, when independent India's constitution was launched, there were some 300 million Hindus in India, and 60 million of these were untouchables. The 240 million touchable Hindus were divided into 3 main castes. At the top were the all-powerful Brahmins, whose preserve was learning. Then came the Kshatriyas, who were virtually the bureaucrats and warriors. And finally, the Vaishyas, the traders. The untouchables served all 3 of these castes and were condemned to be lower than slaves. They were not only untouchable, but also unapproachable and unseeable. If even the shadow of an untouchable crossed a caste Hindu, it was regarded as a crime of great magnitude. And this monstrous cruelty had, somehow acquired the holy approval of the Hindu religion. In the year 1892, the British authority here in India, under political pressure from the influential Brahmins, suddenly and despicably banned all untouchable recruitment into the British Indian Army. Young Ambedkar's Sergeant Major father made up his mind to mortgage his few possessions to begin the all-out education of his little boy. But nothing was easy. The untouchable child was segregated from his caste classmates. Some of the Brahmin teachers would not touch his school books or even allow him to speak for fear of pollution. Sometimes he went thirsty because he was disallowed from sharing caste water. Of course, the spirits of most untouchable children quickly sank into servile oblivion under such unrelenting humiliation. But not Ambedkar. He simply stuck his head deeper into his books with a disturbing, even terrible determination. However, he was known to weep in private. In the year 1908, in spite of continuing insults, Ambedkar matriculated from this school in Bombay. This is the very street where father and son lived in extreme poverty. The Maharaja Baroda heard about Ambedkar, the fighting untouchable, and gave him a scholarship. In the year 1912, Ambedkar became a Bachelor of Arts. His father observed the miracle, and shortly afterwards, feeling that his highest hopes had been fulfilled, he died with a young scholar at his bedside. But the son had barely begun his ascendancy, an ascendancy which was to become a raging crusade. The enlightened prince, the Maharaja Baroda, then offered to finance Ambedkar to study at Columbia University, far away over in the United States of America. In Abraham Lincoln's country, he saw clearly his future journey. He wrote a letter back to India. I am one of those who earnestly desire the well-being of our downtrodden community. He also quoted someone else's words. There is a tide in the affairs of man which, taken at the flood, leads on to fortune. Well, this was flood time for Ambedkar. He was now 20 years old. Here in America, he was made a Master of Arts and a Doctor of Philosophy. He wanted to demonstrate that an untouchable was the best educated man in India. In the year 1920, Ambedkar, having saved some money, traveled to Britain, where he joined the London School of Economics, and he was also admitted to this Gray's Inn to study law. Ambedkar began his legal work here in Bombay, but that was no more than his base. And then on the 9th of March 1924, he began his life-lasting attack against untouchability. He convened a meeting at this Damodar Hall and here created the Association for the Welfare of the Untouchables. He began to attack the 2,000 years of criminal inhumanity on two fronts. First, he organized educational classes for the Untouchables and hostels for those rejected students to live in. Second, and mercilessly, he began to assault his own people's crushed and dormant emotions. He barked the initial warning: "Tell the slave that he is a slave and he will revolt." And the burningly angry young man proceeded to do exactly that. He addressed his fellow Untouchables.
My heart breaks to see the pitiable sight of your faces and to hear your sad voices. You have been groaning from time immemorial, and yet you are not ashamed to hug your helplessness as an inevitability. Why did you not perish in the prenatal stage instead? Why do you worsen the picture of your sorrows and slavery with your despicable and detestable lives? It would have been better to die if you cannot rejuvenate yourselves. As a matter of fact, it is your birthright to get food, shelter, and clothing in equal proportion with every other Hindu individual, high or low. And if you believe in living a respectable life, then you must also believe in self-help. And that is the best help.
Ambedkar marched fearlessly through villages and towns, provoking the hopeless to see hope. Nothing came between him and the 60 million in bondage. Not even his beloved family. He had supported them, but always in grave poverty. 3 of his children died, and then his favorite son, Rajratra, went. But the Untouchables were now waiting for him and depending on him in massive numbers. And Ambedkar dragged himself back into the battle. Here in Mahad, he spoke to a gathering of 10,000 people. He asked them to follow him to the town's water supply, which they, as Untouchables, were disallowed from using by the caste Hindu. The great concourse walked quietly, 4 abreast, and Ambedkar ceremoniously drank the forbidden water. The doctor turned and addressed his hostile opponents.
If you say that your Hindu religion is our religion, then your rights and ours must be equal. But is this the case? If not, on what grounds do you say that we must remain in the Hindu fold in spite of your kicks? A religion which treats millions of its adherents worse than dogs is no religion at all. Religion and slavery are incompatible.
As Ambedkar and his Untouchables were leaving, they were brutally attacked by the British authorities, and of course, by the high caste Hindus. But Ambedkar had now moved on to the offensive with an unforgettable vengeance. Dr. Ambedkar paid special attention to the most underprivileged of the underprivileged. He said this to the women: never regard yourselves as untouchables. Dress yourselves like the touchable ladies. Never mind if your dress is full of patches. Be sure that it is clean. Don't feed your husbands and sons if they are drunkards. And remember, education is as necessary for females as it is for males. As you are, so your children will be. And the untouchable women began to wear the forbidden long sari, and the Hindu heavens didn't fall. During 1928, the British government here in London sent 7 politicians, led by Sir John Simon, to India to investigate possible advances in the governance of the subcontinent. To Britain's credit, Dr. Ambedkar was invited to give evidence, and he eagerly accepted. The great revolutionary party of India, the Congress Party, led and inspired by Mahatma Gandhi and stung by the fact that no Indians were included in the investigating team, refused to cooperate. The pain of his untouchables could now be communicated to the imperial masters direct and at a high level. Please sit down, Dr. Ambedkar. Doctor, what advice have you to offer us on behalf of the depressed classes? I submit that we untouchables need far greater political protection than any other minority in India, for the simple reason that we are, well, with the rare exception of someone like myself, educationally very backward, economically very poor, and socially enslaved. We claim for our protection reserved seats for all untouchables in any Indian legislative assembly. Thank you, Dr. Ambedkar. I will suggest 10 reserved seats for the depressed classes. Mahatma Gandhi's Congress Party, working bravely for the removal of the British from India and thereby win freedom, loudly called Ambedkar traitor because he had cooperated with the British Commission. The doctor equally loudly rejoined, and what about you high caste Hindu nationalists personified by Gandhi, who raised violent protests against the insulting treatment meted out to Indians in South Africa, and who, at the same time, deny human rights to our own untouchable countrymen here in India? The battle lines between India's privileged touchables and India's untouchables were clearly drawn, and blood flew freely. The British government, in their continuing efforts to rule India and appease the multiple facets of Indian society, organized a major discussion here in London to formulate a more liberal constitution for India. It was called the Round Table Conference. The year was 1930, and the delegates included members of the three British political parties, Conservatives, Liberals and Socialists, and India was represented by Christians, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, the royal princes, and the Untouchables. Never before, in at least 2,000 years, had Untouchables been represented as equal to the greatest anywhere. The Viceroy of India invited Dr. Ambedkar. Mahatma Gandhi's Congress Party initially refused to participate, but on the other hand, Dr. Ambedkar stood up on this British world stage and spoke not only for the Untouchables, but as an all-Indian patriot. I, as a specific untouchable, am speaking for at least 1/5 of the total population of India, a population which is as large as the entire population of Great Britain, which is reduced to a position which is worse than that of a slave. Nevertheless, we Untouchables also wish to replace your existing British government by an Indian government of the people of India, for the people of India, and by the people of India. Before you British came to India, we Untouchables were not allowed to draw water from the village well. Has the British government secured us a right to the well? No. Before you British came, we could not enter our Hindu temples to pray. Can we enter now? No. Our endless wrongs have remained as open sores, and they have not been righted, although 150 years of British rule in India have rolled away. As for us Untouchables, nobody can remove our grievances as well as we ourselves can. But we cannot remove them unless we get democratic political power into our own untouchable hands. The determination on Ambedkar's part to demand independent political power for the Untouchables to redress their cruel fate put him into direct conflict with Mahatma Gandhi. It was not that Gandhi had no sympathy for the Untouchables. Indeed, he had even deep sympathy. But he was putting the independence of India from Britain before everything else. And he did not want any division within the Hindu ranks. Indeed, he had stated it very clearly. I will fight for the right of Untouchables to enter Hindu temples after we have won freedom from the British. But Ambedkar had no inclination to wait for 1 second. And in truth, Gandhi was the soul of convoluted Hinduism. He said, "I believe in reincarnation. If a capable untouchable lives honorably, he will be reborn into a higher caste." Well, Ambedkar wasn't sure that there was any rebirth. He pertinently replied, "Under Gandhiism, we untouchables are to be eternal scavengers? Under your Hindu belief, which compels an educated untouchable to do scavenging? Well, that is nothing short of cruelty." It was collision course for two very determined men. Gandhi had conceived the idea of calling the untouchables Harijans, which means the children of God. But most untouchables rejected the new name, the euphemism. They wisely preferred to call a spade a spade. At that round-table conference back here in London, Gandhi, who had finally agreed to attend, boldly said, "I would most strongly resist any further attempt by Dr. Ambedkar to give the Harijans special political representation." Mr. Gandhi is claiming that he and his Congress party represent the untouchables more than I and my untouchable colleagues. That is one of the very false claims that irresponsible people like Mr. Gandhi keep making. Henceforward, we represent ourselves. The British at the Round Table Conference, thank God, did not support Gandhi and his Hindu mentality and came down on the side of Dr. Ambedkar and his people. The final report conferred on the untouchables reserved seats in the proposed Central Assembly of India, and the untouchables were to control those seats by separate electorates. This great victory meant that no one, particularly Gandhi's caste Hindus, could interfere with the untouchable vote. Oh, Gandhi was very alarmed. While our Congress party will always accept any solution that may be acceptable to the Hindus, the Muslims, and the Sikhs, it will be no party to any special reservations for the untouchables, the Harijans. I cannot possibly tolerate what is in store for Hinduism if these two divisions are set up in every village in India. Those people who speak of political rights for the untouchables do not know India and do not know how Indian society is constructed today. Therefore, I will resist your demands, Dr. Ambedkar, with my life. Supporters of the Congress party called Ambedkar a British hireling and a monster, and he replied to the abuse, "At present, I am the most hated man in Hindu India. I am represented as a traitor and branded as the greatest enemy of my beloved country because I oppose you, Mr. Gandhi. But I will not budge an inch from our righteous cause." Mahatma Gandhi's unrelenting and courageous preoccupation was with freeing India from British rule. And so he was arrested by the British and imprisoned in this Yerwada jail. And it was here that Gandhi issued an ultimatum which not only shuddered through India, but reverberated even around the world. I will now resist with my life the separation of untouchable Hindus from caste Hindus. I declare my resolve to fast unto death if separate electorates for the untouchables are not abolished. The British government immediately withdrew from the lethal confrontation. Well, Doctor, a solution to the representation of the untouchables has to be settled within the Hindu community. Having given basic human justice to the sufferers, the British now scuttled away from their sometime humanistic principles, leaving Ambedkar entirely on his own, except for his near-dumb millions. The good doctor replied, "It is a painful surprise that Mr. Gandhi should have singled out the removal of special representation for us untouchables as an excuse for his self-immolation. It has now fallen to my lot to be the sole villain of the piece. But I tell you, I shall not be deterred from my duty and betray the just rights of my people. No, not even if you hang me from the nearest lamppost." As Gandhi quietly starved himself in this jail, his Congress party and a very large slice of India began to panic. Gandhi could now barely speak. He was carried into this Theravada jail courtyard, which was less oppressive than his cell. He was rested under this very mango tree. The situation became hourly more desperate, and finally the Congress party officers asked Dr. Ambedkar to come and talk with the dying Mahatma. "You are being unfair to us, Mr. Gandhi. It is always my lot to appear to be unfair. I can't help it. You have my fullest sympathy. I am with you, Doctor, in most things. But I understand that you are interested in saving my life. Yes, then you know what you must do to save my life. I know that you do not want to forego what your people have been granted by the British award. You are an untouchable by birth. I am an untouchable by adoption. You and I must be one and indivisible. But I am prepared to give my life in order to avert any disruption in the Hindu community." And the magician known as Mahatma Gandhi got his way. With the positive danger of being called the killer of Gandhi and the inevitable killings of untouchables that would ensue, Dr. Ambedkar capitulated and renounced the greatest possible achievement of his life's work, the gift of unadulterated political power to the millions of virtual slaves in India. Gandhi sipped orange juice and lived. But he was deeply disturbed by his victory and philosophized. I do not want to be reborn, but if I am reborn, I wish to be reborn a Harijan, an untouchable, and lead a struggle like Dr. Ambedkar against the oppression that has been heaped upon his people. Ambedkar had been knocked to the ground, but he was not finished. He formed a new political movement. He called it the Independent Labour Party. The doctor announced that they would not only represent the untouchables, but all of the underprivileged and the working class in general. The new Indian Constitution elections were held, and out of the 17 candidates that Ambedkar's party put up, they won 50.
And the doctor went into the legislative chamber and hammered all of the exploiters within his vision. Of course, he received death threats, including one written in blood.
The Second World War rumbled around the world, and Britain dropped India into the conflict without consultation. The result of this high-handed act on Britain's part was that Jawaharlal Nehru, under the influence of Gandhi, deliberately inhibited Britain's war effort, and he, with an agonized conscience, suffered imprisonment by the British for that attitude. Ambedkar did not see the appalling war quite as they did. He addressed his young, untouchable student followers.
Gandhi's and Nehru's all-out rebellion against Britain is insane. It is madness to weaken law and order at a time when the barbarians, I mean the Japanese and the Germans, are at the gates of India. The Nazis regard the German race as a race of supermen, but they regard the brown races, and Indians are included in that category, as having the very bottom place in that gradation. Without British success in this war, there can be no hope of self-government for India. I therefore urge you, our untouchable youth, to suspend your academic studies and qualify yourselves for military commissions in the British Indian Army.
Ambedkar asked the British to form untouchable battalions, and the untouchables fought with the British. Ambedkar became a formidable influence in wartime India, and he spoke very frankly. I hate all injustice, tyranny, pompousness, and humbug. And my hatred embraces all those who are guilty of them. I want to tell my critics, wherever they are, that I regard my feelings of hatred as a real force. Those feelings of hatred are the reflexes of the love I bear for the causes I believe in, and I am in no way ashamed of them. The Second World War ended with victory for the democracies, and India won its independence. The ruling Indian Congress Party, with Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru at its head, could not afford to ignore the extraordinary untouchable, and Ambedkar was invited into Nehru's cabinet as Minister of Law. And now the deeply significant time had arrived to compose and formulate independent India's constitution. It was not less than an awesome prospect. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru hastened to his mystical mentor, Mahatma Gandhi.
What is your problem? I am finding it difficult to locate an Indian competent enough to frame a constitution for our country. Well, I'm thinking of inviting Sir Ivor Jennings, the distinguished constitutionalist, who has already drafted the constitutions of several Asian countries. I know of one Indian who could do it. Who? Dr. Ambedkar.
Our inspiration, Dr. Ambedkar, was appointed to be chairman of the committee that was to create independent India's constitution. It was a phenomenon that could not have been imagined. India began to call him the father of the constitution, and in presenting that constitution to the new nation, the Republic of India, he said to Nehru, "I express to you my gratitude for reposing so much trust in me. As regards the merits of this constitution, however good it may be, it is sure to turn out bad if those who work it happen to be a bad lot. And it will turn out to be a good constitution if those who are called to work it happen to be a good lot."
Included in Ambedkar's constitution were the brave and proper words, "Untouchability in any form is abolished, and the imposition of any disability on that account shall be an offense." And then Ambedkar proceeded to put all of these democratic high hopes for India to the test. He began work on the Hindu Code Bill, which was meant to liberalize all of Hindu society.
He was demanding that all Hindu women must be entitled to an absolute right over property, and for a Hindu woman's right to divorce, etc., etc. Well, Ambedkar very quickly learnt the ancient bitter truth. Orthodox Hindus in the government were enraged at his proposals and blasted him and his best hopes.
He was forced to realize that his own untouchable people were controlled by those very same Hindus in the Congress Party and elsewhere. He went to see the Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, and his associates, particularly the Hindu element that had opposed his liberal plans.
For a long time, I have been thinking of resigning. The only thing that has held me back was the hope that it would be possible to give effect to the Hindu Code Bill. The bill has, as you know, been killed. Therefore, I see no purpose in my continuing to be a member of your cabinet. I regret your decision.
And a Brahmin member of the Congress Party asked,
"Do you feel no gratitude for the great opportunities that we have given you?" Let us be frank. My being offered a place in your cabinet was good election propaganda. I am reminded of the great Irish freedom fighter, Daniel O'Connell, who said,
No man can be grateful at the cost of his honor. And no nation can be grateful at the cost of its liberty.
A European asked.
Doctor, you are known as the father of India's constitution, but now you have said that you are prepared to burn it. Why? If a person has built a temple for God to reside in, and then that person discovers that it is inhabited by the devil, he has an obligation to destroy that temple.
Ambedkar was now not unlike King Lear, battling against the overwhelming storm. Now Ambedkar knew that the time had come for him to perform his last act of revolt. Here in this city of Nagpur, in front of a vast congregation of untouchables, he renounced the Hindu faith and he formally embraced Buddhism. Ambedkar said, "By discarding my ancient Hindu religion, which stood for inequality and oppression, today I am reborn. I will henceforth lead a life guided by the three principles of Lord Buddha: knowledge, the true path, and compassion." And as he spoke these final, agonizing words, his voice choked. "I renounce Hinduism." He then said, "Those of you who wish to convert to Buddhism with me, stand up." And then the vast concourse rose like a great sea. It is estimated that millions of his untouchables followed his example on that very day. And that was the end of his life's work. Less than 2 months later, on December the 6th, 1956, he died.
बाबा भीम ने कुछ भी न जीते इस जग में.
He taught us to live. Ambedkar taught us to survive. We had no status in this world. Ambedkar taught us to survive.
बाबा भीम ने